to Season 1, Episode 2 of CREB Talks. In this season, we're thrilled to feature esteemed female economists from around the globe here to enlighten you on topics such as business and economics. Today, our guest is from Europe. Her name is Viola Asri. Viola, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. So I'm a senior researcher at the Christian Michelsen Institute in Bergen, Norway. So at this research institute, we have like a focus on development research, but we are researchers from multiple disciplines, including economics, political science, and anthropology. And I'm also still affiliated with the University of Constance in Germany, where I did my postdoc previously. And prior to that, I did my PhD in Zurich and I studied development economics and economics more broadly. And I'm from Germany originally. Yeah.
I would love to know how you got interested in economics. Like, how did your journey unfold?
Actually, a funny story because when I was finishing high school, I remember I really wanted to become the news person on the TV, like the most popular German TV show at 8 p.m. in the evening. I wanted to be that news person. So I was quite interested in political science and international relations. So I decided to study political science, but I also opted to study economics to have like better job prospects. And I always enjoyed economics during my high school time. So I found a bachelor's degree which allowed me to combine political science and economics. I studied both initially, 50-50. But then because I had like a 50% combination of the two subjects, I was like immediately exposed to macro and microeconomics. And I enjoyed both subjects so much that I completely left political science and I only continued with economics. So after only 8 weeks of studies, I decided to continue only with economics. And then what really motivated me to pursue a career in development economics was like first initially the exposure to current research in seminars and also for my master's thesis, but later on the experience of living and working in India during my master's.
Your research focuses on various fields within economics. Can you tell us what areas you focus on and what drives your interest to research these specific topics?
So I would say, as you know, my main area is development economics, but I think my research also relates to topics in labor economics and behavioral economics. And I also have some work related to political economy, so the performance of local government representatives, but also political incentives. And I also have some work in progress related to health and economics. So I actually had some publications during the COVID pandemic about the willingness to wear face masks and to get vaccinated. But I also have some work on female genital cutting, which is like its intersection of gender economics and health economics. And I think all of my research is driven by like a deep interest in understanding how interventions or public policy, more specifically, could improve the well-being of individuals and especially of vulnerable groups during difficult phases of life. So taking as an example, elderly poor in my research on targeting of social pensions, or teenage girls in the context of career choices, and especially teenage girls who face rigid gender norms. Yeah.
So I came across your study on the Japanese Communist-inspired program in India, which sounds super fascinating, by the way. Could you tell us more about it?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. It's great that you noticed this part of our work. So it's jointly with Ankush Asri, and we started collaborating with an NGO in India that basically uses the Japanese Kuman model to support children with their foundational skills and their foundational learning. So they focus both on mathematics and English. And the way how the Kuman model works is that you start at a relatively easy level. You get a worksheet to complete. It could be in English, it could be in math. And then when you pass a worksheet, you get another worksheet, which is slightly more difficult. So you basically
Right.
always remain at the level of your ability and you slowly progress to more difficult topics in both mathematics and English. So this NGO, they basically found a way to implement this Kuman model in a very low-cost manner with like people living in low-income communities, where basically local NGO teachers, they would send the worksheets to mothers on their smartphones, and then the children would complete the worksheets, get them graded by the NGO teacher and then get another worksheet depending on their abilities. So yeah, I found it really fascinating how they were able, like during COVID, to come up with this creative idea of like supporting foundational skills among school-going children. Um,
Right.
and they were really focused on children that go to very low-cost private schools, but often these low-cost private schools have like a lot of resource constraints and capacity constraints. They are not functioning that well, but they supported the children in gaining those foundational skills and like keeping a track of also what was being taught in their classrooms. So
Right.
we worked with this NGO to understand basically what type of factors predict kids' learning progression and engagement. So here, learning
Right.
progression means the number of worksheets that you have passed. So how do you progress from one level to another? And engagement stands for the number of completed worksheets. And based on this initial analysis, we are now like considering to extend our collaboration with NGO.
What are the main predictors of learning progression and engagement in this program, and did you see any gender differences?
So our initial research was based on a small pilot of like 185 students. And not very surprisingly, students are doing better with the Kumon model if their mothers have secondary education. So they are better able to use the worksheets and to progress in their learning. And this also made sense because we knew from the beginning that most of the interaction between the NGO teacher and the student is happening through the mother. So the mothers are always well informed about what the NGO is doing. But
Right.
we also found out that surprisingly, fathers, like if a student has a father who has a higher level of education, like secondary education above, then we actually saw that students were submitting fewer worksheets and progressed less in their Kuman learning. And our interpretation so far is that these fathers might be more involved in their children's education, but at the same time, they don't know about the work that the NGO is doing, and they are not well informed about
Right.
the Kuman model, like in contrast to the mothers. So now it seems to be an important question to understand how NGOs could also more effectively engage the fathers of the students to engage them more effectively and to have the fathers also contributing to students' foundational skills learning here. But our results do not show any variation in terms of gender. So we see similar progression and engagement, both of girls and boys. But we interestingly find that most of the students' learning and engagement depends on the quality of the NGO teacher. So we have conducted also a survey of all the NGO teachers that work with the students on the ground. And we find that basically some NGO teachers had a much higher performance, a much better performance, and other NGO teachers had a weaker performance. So we use these results to inform the NGO and to allow them to take this into consideration for training and recruiting NGO teachers.
Let's move on to your research focusing on career exploration programs for young women from disadvantaged backgrounds, another very interesting topic. So, how do these programs help these women in finding jobs and, just support them in enhancing their skills?
Yeah, sure, I would love to. So basically, this project is also together with Ankush Asri and Anke Höfler. And yeah, as you said, we're looking at a program which is called Career Exploration Program. It's actually it's very different from career counseling, what we often come across like in developed world or like in more high income settings, because students here are not being told what type of career would be good for them. But instead, the idea is that students explore on their own different career options and first start with exploring their own strengths and interests. And at the same time, they are supported in this career exploration process by like a trained facilitator. And I will say more about the role of the facilitator in a second, but this program is basically targeting secondary school students from disadvantaged socioeconomic backgrounds in urban areas. And these facilitators take the students through different phases of the program. So at the beginning, students would focus on the activities on understanding their own interests and strengths. And then they explore a variety of career paths and the returns to different types of skill formation and education, while also considering the constraints that they might face around them. And then in the end, they prepare a plan of action and they present it to other students, typically in their school, in their grade. So the most important aspect of this program is that it helps or encourages students to choose a career objective based on their interests. While in the setting we are working in, a lot of like
Right.
the choices are often driven by like what people around you expect you to do, what your family expects you to do, or what is accepted and approved in the community. But at the same time, the program also motivates students to find someone in their community that they can talk to and who could support them. And this is important because most of the students that the program is working with, especially the girls, but they also work with boys, but more with girls, they lack role models. So I think in our surveys, we know that like 45% of the students would say that they don't have anyone around them who inspires them or that they could look up to. And so this program
Right.
also encourages students to look around in their community for someone whom they could talk to about their career plans and who could potentially support them. And typically, the parents have lower levels of
Right.
education than the students. And typically, mothers are housewives, they're not doing paid work outside the household. And similarly, other female household members might not be working. So then the importance also of the facilitators comes
Right.
in here because these facilitators are basically just a few years older than the students, but they act as potential role models because they have already completed other steps on the career path. And the facilitators are from similar socioeconomic backgrounds.
Right.
They're often from the same geographic area and they're often of the same gender. So in girls' schools, we would work with female facilitators, in boys' schools with male facilitators, and in co-educational schools with mixed teams. So while we're working mainly with girls, of course, this
Mhm.
program is also relevant for boys. And during the program, these facilitators can become an important source of information and inspiration for the students.
Were there any insights that you gained regarding how this program helps these young women in their career aspirations or career readiness?
Yeah, so this is a bit early now because this is work in progress. So we have some positive short-term results, but we're going to have more data collections in the future. So I thought I'd tell you instead about like a surprising insight that we got while we were preparing this project. So we did a lot of qualitative field work, like especially Ankush and I, and we spoke to students about their career plans. And there were like plenty of inspiring insights. Like I don't even have time to discuss them all. But I remember very clearly that when we spoke to girls, they always said that they wanted to work in a good job. And then we would ask them, okay, what do you mean by a good job? And then they would either select very few occupations, like working as a civil servant or working as a teacher, or some of them would also just
Mhm.
respond directly, a job that my family approves is a good job. And what I found very inspiring from these conversations is that like young men in these settings will always work no matter what. But for women, the job
Mhm.
has to be good enough, right? There's another layer to it.
Right.
Yeah. Um, and that of course makes it more difficult for them, but it also shows that their choices might be more limited because they consider like what type of occupation is approved by my family and my community. Um, and then I found it fascinating in our work to see
Right.
that even though we're working with secondary school students in urban settings who are already like in the 11th or 12th grade of school, I find it quite surprising to see that even among girls, there's relatively high agreement with rigid gender norms. So we found in our surveys that about
Mm.
30% of girls in our initial surveys would agree that men should have more right to a job than women. And you can just imagine that like this share of
Interesting.
respondents agreeing to it is much, much higher among boys. But already among girls, it's like 30%. But on the other hand, we also found it very inspiring
Mm.
to see that students have very optimistic beliefs about the future. So at this age, being a teenager, they seem to be they're still quite confident in their responses, even though like they will face some challenges along the way. And they also strongly believe that effort will pay off. But I think like, yeah, it's unfortunately too early to tell you our results in the short term because we're still going to do data collections. And we're looking forward to sharing them in the future. Yeah.
Your research often focuses on India and Bangladesh. I'm just curious to know what draws you to these particular regions.
Yeah, so since I finished school, I always wanted to spend time in contexts which are like very different to the place where I've grown up, so very different from Germany. And
Right.
so during my master's, I actually studied for 1 semester in Delhi.
Okay.
And I returned to do an internship there as well. So basically, I first went to study there. And then I was in this phase of my master's where I was supposed to write my master's thesis, but I was like, okay, I've studied in India, but I have not really lived in any developing context, right? So I need to do that first before I write my master's thesis. So I was fortunate to have like a very supportive master's thesis supervisor, Professor Stefan Klaasen, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago. And he understood my interest in spending more time living and working there. So I found a great internship with the German Development Corporation, also in Delhi. And during that time, I also wrote my master's thesis there. So India was just like when I started my PhD, India was just a place where I had spent quite some time. And it had
Mhm.
become the context that I knew best next to my home country, or at least like the areas of India where I had spent time because India is so huge. Um, but it was not only the time that I had spent there, but I also managed to build up like a personal and professional network. I also learned Hindi during my master studies. And even though my Hindi has become a bit rusty now, like I'm still able to understand quite a lot. I'm able to read our own survey questions. So it's just the context where I like to work in. And then Bangladesh is just, I mean, maybe if you look at South Asia from a distance, you think, okay, yeah, Bangladesh and India are similar, but actually they're not. But like while I was working on India, some opportunity came up to conduct some research in Bangladesh as well. So it was just like a little bit past dependency that also like connected me with researchers in Bangladesh and provided me some opportunities to conduct research there as well. Yeah.
As an economist, what aspect of your work do you find the most fulfilling or rewarding?
I think the most fulfilling part of our work is to have conversations with local stakeholders. So, of course, this includes important decision makers, like could be at the government level or like NGO representatives, but it also just includes important like people on the ground. So just like students, mothers, um, elderly poor in my work, so many different people. So I think that's the most fulfilling and interesting part, but it's also exciting, of course, to share our research results with academic audiences and with policy-oriented audiences. So I
Mhm.
enjoy that very much. And what I try to do in my work or in my dissemination is I often share results from my own research, but I put them into perspective and also share more about the broader evidence on a topic, because I think that's very important for policymakers especially. And what
Mhm.
I also enjoy about my research is that it requires a lot of teamwork. So I enjoy working in teams with other authors, but also with um, yeah, with local research staff that we often collaborate with and local researchers. And this also involves mentoring junior researchers, jointly overcoming different challenges that we face. And finally, I also enjoy teaching actually impact evaluation methods because I feel like bringing more people like on the same page on how we can do good impact evaluation is very fruitful and important for our work. And I like to enable others to rigorously think about how we can identify causal impacts and how we can measure outcomes accurately. Yeah. But I'm also, I mean,
Okay.
I'm still learning a
That's
lot
good
from
to hear.
others too. So that's also part of the story.
Lastly, what advice would you give individuals who are looking to pursue a career in economics?
Yes. So I think the most important advice is to focus on topics that you're passionate about and that really interest you, because I think once you are like really passionate about your research, research will turn into actually like fun. So you will enjoy doing more and more of it, and you will also be able to engage collaborators or convince policy stakeholders and so on. So I think like interest and passion is like the most important factor here. But my other advice would be to focus in the beginning on building up like a good methodological foundation that you can draw up on while doing your own research. And then once you get the opportunity, just try to spend a lot of time in the field, talk to many different people, consider learning the language if it might help your research and your local insights. Um, but also, of course, familiarize yourself with existing research in your area of interest. So I think like what happens to a lot of PhD students, including myself, is like you spend a lot of time thinking about your own research questions and you work on it. And then, I don't know, after 1, 2 years, you figure out, oh, there has been a very similar paper. And that often leads to a lot of disappointment and frustration. So yeah, do what you can to discuss your research plans with others, get their inputs, look up the research that has been done, and seek inputs early on from others in the field, because it could save you a lot of time. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Viola, for taking the time out of your life to do this interview. It was a pleasure having you here. We will link your information down below as well as your social media accounts in case anyone has any questions or would like to follow your journey. And we will see you guys in episode 3.